Often the first question I get asked about Bellingcat is where does the name come from? So I'll start there, keep it easy. So Bellingcat comes from a fable called Belling the Cat, and it's about a group of very small mice, and they're terrified of a large cat. So they have a little meeting, and they decide that they're going to put a bell around the cat's neck. But one of the mice points out they don't actually have a plan to do that. So at Bellingcat, we teach people how to do that. And the process we use can be broken down into 3 steps: identify, verify, and amplify. So identify can be something quite simple, like chancing across an interesting post on social media. It can be something that's a lot more proactive, digging through information that's coming from open sources. Verification is then actually checking if that's accurate and valid. And the final step is amplification, and that can be a whole range of different products, from a 100-page report to a blog post to a video to all kinds of projects. Because once you verify that information, it's something you can rely on. But I started back in 2011 doing this kind of verification, and my background wasn't in journalism or investigation. I was working as an administration assistant at a company that housed refugees in the East Midlands in the UK, and our company lost its contract, and I was stuck in an office by myself for several months with nothing to do. So I went on the internet and started arguing with people about stuff, as you often do when you're bored at work. So one of the first things I was arguing about was the conflict in Libya. I was on the Guardian Middle East live blog looking at images that were coming from there and trying to figure out, are these actually from Libya? Are they valid? And this is one of the videos I looked at. This is one of the first videos I geolocated. And it was from rebels who were based in the Nafusa Mountains region. They claimed they had pushed out of that region and captured a town called TG. And there was a lot of debate about whether or not this video claimed to show the town was actually genuine or not. And I was looking at this video trying to figure out how can you prove where this is filmed. Well, I noticed there was this mosque that's in the video with a dome and a minaret, and next to that it's a road with 2 lanes. It's very wide, it's got a divider in the middle. We can see by the tank as well it can easily fit a few cars. So when we're doing this investigation process now, we start with the biggest clue. So they're claiming it's in TG in Libya. Now, we could start by looking at every other town in Libya, but it's easier to kind of just trust them for this moment. So we go to TG, and we can see there's a road running through the center. And if we zoom into that road, we can see that it's wide, it's 2 lanes, we can see how many cars are there. So this indicates this could be the place we're looking for. And as we move down the road, we eventually find this mosque with a dome and a minaret. And we can also see the position of the camera has to be the bottom right-hand corner facing to the west, because otherwise the dome and the minaret would be in the wrong position. So once we have these larger details and we've identified them, we go back and review the video again and look for smaller and smaller details. So we start looking at things like the curve and the coloration and the wall and the position of poles and utility poles and buildings and every single detail in the video, and comparing it to the satellite imagery until we're sure it is the correct location. So this is a very, very simple example of a geolocation, something we do all the time now. This is a little different. This is a fairly historic video. This is actually the first video from Syria of what's known as a barrel bomb, which is an improvised device pushed out of a helicopter. The thing is, that doesn't really look like much more than a bin that's been pushed over. So there were a lot of people saying, well, this isn't true. So we had things like this on Russia Today saying barrel bomb baloney. But at this point, I'd been collecting YouTube channels and subscribing to them, and all of the information coming from Syria was being shared via these YouTube channels. Syrian opposition groups, armed groups, local coordination committees use YouTube as a way to get information out about the conflict. And it led to videos like this, where we can just see a barrel bomb being pushed out of the rear of this helicopter. And more of these videos started appearing, and they became clearer and clearer. But the clearest video of all was this one. This is actually filmed inside a helicopter as it's being lit by a cigarette and pushed out the back. So that was shared online, and there was an immediate debate about where it was actually filmed, because people were saying, well, how do you know this is filmed in Syria? Well, what we do have here is this top-down view of the town they're dropping it on. And what you can do is go to Google Earth, spend quite a long time searching through satellite imagery, but eventually you'll find this town. And we can do a side-by-side comparison, and it shows that the road layout, the various details are exactly the same. So we can confirm this helicopter was flying over this location when it pushed that barrel bomb. So this is another way we do it. Now, we've been doing a lot of work examining airstrikes in Syria. Syria is really one of the first conflicts I looked into. Because of the large amount of video footage coming from there, it became the focus of a lot of open source investigation. But this is one example we were looking into because there was an airstrike in a town and there was very clear footage of it happening, but Russia claimed that this airstrike didn't occur. So The Guardian produced the following video that explained what happened.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. أنا Studium Generale تاريخ 20/10/2015. قام طيران الحرب الروسي بشن غارة على مدينة سوين. فتبين أنه الغارة استهدفت مدرسة هي ملاصقة للمشفى الميداني، ولله الحمد أن المدرسة كانت خارجة عن العمل بسبب القصف الصادق بالمدرسة. كان الدفاع المدني كانت قبل ما تنشن الغارة بثواني دقائق عم تطلب من الناس انه تروح من الموقع. وانا بالموقع عم بصور الغارة. فهون شن الطيران فالضرب في الموقع اللي انا فيه على بعد مترين أو 3 أمتار ويا الصاروخ مني. أول ما وقع الصاروخ أنا حسيت إن جسمي بده يتمزق من الضغط. من قاب الأرض كل الناس عم تسمع صوت عياط والناس ما منتبه علي إنه في هون وقع مصاب. الله أكبر! كان في شظير الصدر وحروق بإيدي اليسار وشظايا بإيدي اليمين وإجري اليسار، بالإضافة إلى ردود في كل الجسم والصدر وشق كبير بالفك السفلي، إضافة إلى شق بالعين. الله أكبر! أنت مضطر أنك تتوجه للموقع، سواء أنت كعملك كموصي أو أنت عملك كرجل منقذ أو مسعف، لأنه في ناس بحاجتك.
So this seemed like pretty clear evidence that something had happened, but the Russian Ministry of Defense gave a press conference where they presented this image, and they claimed it was evidence that this was not actually an event that occurred, and Russia Today covered it.
It was recently alleged that Russian jets destroyed a hospital in the city of Samin, causing the Russian Defense Ministry to, call on journalists to double-check the stories they publish.
I call on the respected mass media not to jeopardize their reputation by publishing fakes like this.
But it's not just the media. The accusations are actually picked up by the US State Department. And to prove the hospital is totally intact, the Russian Defense Ministry provided up-to-date satellite photographs.
The building on this image, dated October 31st, does not look like it was recently bombed. How can we tell if it's the hospital in Samin? A year ago, a video was posted on YouTube that shows the hospital under construction. Here's a screenshot from that year-old video. And here is the Russian Defense Ministry's aerial image of what it says is the hospital. We see a similar dome-shaped structure next to the building on both images. We see a wall or a fence positioned in a similar way. So where exactly is the hospital that Russia is accused of hitting?
So we've got two different stories about the same event there, so we have to kind of check whether they're true or not. So the first thing we can do is go to the location that's indicated in the Russian story to check it's the same one as the White Helmets video. So we can overlay the image here and show this is the location in question in Samin. We can then look at the White Helmets video and start using features that are visible to confirm it's the correct location. So the hospital is just to the left-hand side of this frame. And there's various features here that are identifiable that confirms the location. The camera is pointing to the north. This is the position in green where he was stood when the bomb hit. And we can start looking at details in the background. So we can see here this building, this small square building that's visible on the satellite imagery. And the right-hand satellite image is from before the airstrike took place. We also have these poles that are visible. They're casting 4 distinct shadows, which are also visible here. And behind it, a wall casting a very regular shape. Now, if we go to the moment of the explosion, we can see the poles are here. We can see that the wall's behind it. And then we can see the bomb lands quite close to that location. Oh, video's not playing. I have to do it by hand. Oh, well, that didn't work. Anyway, so it lands very close to the wall. And again, we have this other view after the second airstrike pointing to the north. So now what we can see is the building that was here before has been completely destroyed. So we wouldn't expect to see anything on a satellite image. So the right-hand image, again, shows it before it was destroyed. Then we have the 4 poles. 2 of them have now been knocked down. So we'd only expect to see 2 shadows cast by poles now. We look at the wall behind it, and we can see it's completely destroyed, as is part of the building behind it. So when we're looking at the satellite imagery now, after the airstrike, we're expecting to see a building missing, the wall destroyed, and only 2 utility poles. So when we look at the Russian MOD satellite image from supposedly after the airstrike, we can see the building that's been destroyed is still standing. The 4 utility poles are still casting the shadow, even though 2 of them have been knocked down in the airstrike. And the wall behind it is still standing. What this shows us is the aerial image that the Russians provided was taken actually before the airstrike, and they're using it as evidence that this airstrike didn't occur. So this is a fairly simple fact check that we can do, and we do quite often when there's 2 stories that counter each other. This was similar with this airstrike in Al Jinnah Mosque in Syria. Initially, it was reported a mosque had been hit. Lots of civilians were killed. It was just before the evening prayers. There'd been a religious lesson going on. Dozens of people were killed. And the initial allegation was that it was another Russian or Syrian airstrike. Except, quite quickly, this was recovered from the debris of the mosque. This is not from any kind of Russian or Syrian bomb. This is from a US Hellfire missile. So this mosque had been destroyed as far as all the reports we were seeing said. Lots of people were killed, and the remains of a US-made weapon had been recovered from it. So this became a very interesting case. As this kind of discussion was happening on social media, the usual groups like the White Helmets and local media centers were gathering information and sharing it online. We were reaching out to people on the ground. We had been speaking to Human Rights Watch and other organizations about what they were doing. This same kind of missile that we're seeing here had been used in other airstrikes, and the US Central Command actually released a statement about this, saying that an Al-Qaeda in Syria meeting location had been attacked, killing several terrorists. But nothing we saw indicated that this was an Al-Qaeda meeting locating. All the civilians on the ground were saying that it was only civilians there. It was a mosque that was in use. So several hours later, they released another statement, and this time it included a satellite image. And this image, they said, showed the building they attacked, that there were dozens of Al-Qaeda leaders killed, not just several terrorists. And this structure on the left-hand side of the image was the mosque. But everything we were finding indicated it wasn't. So we spent a couple of weeks gathering evidence, reconstructing the mosque from the interior, working with Human Rights Watch to gather information on the ground, and also working with an organization called Forensic Architecture. And we pieced all this information together, and Forensic Architecture produced the following video, which takes you through the evidence that we discovered and reveals what happened to Al Jinnah Mosque.
On March 16, 2017, at around 6:55 p.m., a U.S. airstrike targeted Sayyidina Umar ibn al-Khattab Mosque in Al Jinnah, in the province of Aleppo, Syria, while almost 300 people were gathering for the Isha night prayers. The Syrian Civil Defense, also known as the White Helmets, claimed to have recovered the bodies of 38 civilians. 5 of them were children. The U.S. Central Command claimed responsibility for the airstrike, stating, U.S. forces conducted an airstrike on an Al-Qaeda in Syria meeting on March 16th, killing several terrorists, wrongly locating it in Idlib, Syria. The following day, the Pentagon released an image of the building after the strike, claiming it was a partially constructed community meeting hall, that dozens of core Al-Qaeda terrorists were killed, that they deliberately did not target the mosque at the left edge of the photo, and that initial assessments did not indicate civilian casualties. Our investigation seeks to establish what was the use of the building, were there civilian casualties, and how did the incident unfold in time and space. Using available and sourced imagery, videos, satellite photographs, and survivor testimonies, we began analyzing the building before and after the strike. We have identified 2 large craters in the north part of the building. Munitions experts confirmed they are consistent with 2 500-pound bombs. We obtained a video of the building recorded 2 months prior to its destruction. On the roof is the adhan speaker used for the call to prayer. A sign next to the entrance reads, Sayyidina Umar ibn al-Khattab Mosque. We asked a local photographer to document the interior after the strike. The mosque's entrance sign is still by the door. Shelves for worshippers' shoes indicate it is a mosque. As do the rugs in the mihrab, where the imam leads the prayer, which clearly indicate that contrary to US statements, the building is a large and fully functioning mosque. We interviewed and exchanged architectural plans with the building's original contractor and caretaker, who was also wounded in the strike. The upper floor, he said, contained the imam's flat. His wife was at home and was killed in the strike. The ground floor contained the main prayer hall in the south, as well as the ritual washing room, the toilets, the kitchen, and the winter prayer hall in the north part. The strike took place just as a religious seminar in the winter prayer hall was finishing up. Some 40 to 50 people were still there. Others were gathering in the main prayer hall in preparation for the night prayer. A video taken during the construction of the building verifies witness testimonies regarding the layout and use of each room. There were no doors enclosing the winter prayer hall in the north, making it an unlikely place of an Al-Qaeda senior leader meeting. Two bombs hit the northern part of the building. A large number of people started to flee the building. As they evacuated, they were targeted by several missiles. An anonymous US official confirmed the use of 4 Hellfire missiles. We interviewed the director of the White Helmets rescue operation, Mohammed Hallaq.
أنا محمد الحلاق قائد قطاري في حلب الغربي بالدفاع المدني.
Hallaq described seeing 20 to 30 people scattered between the building and the road. Other witnesses confirmed this account. After the first strike, people went outside, and as they fled, they were struck in the streets. The plane was monitoring the place. It wanted to kill everyone who tried to get out. Those who immediately fled, people from surrounding areas who came to the rescue, they all got hit outside and torn into pieces. Many died in that strike. While sharing screens over Skype calls, Hallaq told us where they found victims within the rubble. 11 people were injured. They were found in these locations. 8 people inside the building died as a result of the 2 blasts. We know the location of 7.
أيوة هون نعم هون أخرجنا شخص طفل أخرجناه الساعة 3 بالليل تقريبا عايش حتى في التصوير موجود يعني.
In this clip, Hallaq is seen pulling out 14-year-old Muhammad Arabi. He later died of his injuries. We found and analyzed markings on the road that indicate the traces of Hellfire missiles, identifiable by their distinct fragmentation pattern and by remnants found nearby. This confirms witness testimonies regarding secondary strikes on evacuees.
So, just before we published the report, Human Rights Watch had written their own report using the information we're sharing, and they sent it to US Central Command. And US Central Command replied, and they said the following. They said they acknowledged that the draft Human Rights Watch report could not have taken into account the classified information available to US authorities. This may help explain why the US investigation reached a different conclusion. So whilst they disagreed at first, a couple of weeks later, they actually admitted they had hit a mosque complex and that their investigation found they had killed civilians. They still claimed it was a legitimate target because they believed Al-Qaeda was in there, and in fact there was only 1 civilian killed and everyone else who was killed there was definitely Al-Qaeda. They only actually spoke to their own staff about this. They didn't use any of the kind of sources we were using. So it appears we came to a very different conclusion. We're now working a lot on justice and accountability and the use of open source investigation. This is a really interesting case from the International Criminal Court. In 2017, the International Criminal Court issued an arrest warrant for this guy, Wafali. He was part of the major in the Al-Saqqa Brigade, which was fighting for General Haftar. And they've been fighting around Benghazi and quite successfully so against various Islamist militants, and they had started capturing them. And Wafali had started posting videos on his Facebook page of him executing these people, claiming that they were found guilty and executing them. I'll just warn you, there's a little bit of blood in this next video, but we were looking at these videos when they were announced as being part of the indictment. They had all been on Facebook, many had been shared widely on social media, and we looked at one video in particular that showed, it was the 6th video in the sequence, and it showed rows of men lined up, prepared for execution. And this is Wafali reading the piece of paper here about the execution. So we wanted to see if we could geolocate this. The first thing we did is we extracted stills from the video that allowed us to create one large image of the entire area visible in the video. Even though we did that, there weren't many details visible. It looked like a big, barren, empty space. But in the corner of the video screen, we could actually see some properties like buildings that were visible. There were a fence, a wall, and a fork in the road. So we started with the buildings because the brigade had actually just been fighting in this area, known as the Chinese building area, and posting photographs and videos of it on their Facebook page. And there were partly constructed buildings similar to what we could see in the distance. So we started using that to narrow down the areas it could be. So this is the Chinese building area we're moving into. It's a large area of partly constructed apartment buildings in the south of Benghazi. It's still quite a large area, so there are various open spaces we were looking at to see if we could find this fork in the road and other details. And eventually we settled with this area. And the first thing that confirmed it could be correct, apart from the wall that was visible, the fork in the road, and the buildings in the distance, were the bushes that were visible in the satellite imagery. What we did is we took the camera position in Google Earth and matched it to the camera position in the video. And we merged the two together. And if you just look at the bushes in the distance of this photograph, you'll see they're in exactly the same position as the ones in the video. When we looked at the satellite imagery from after the execution, something else appeared, along with track marks, dark marks on the ground. And these are in fact the bloodstains from the execution, which themselves line up with the bloodstains visible in the video. So we're able to confirm the precise location of the camera, the precise location of each of these victims of the execution, and this allowed us to extract another piece of information about the executions. You can see these very long shadows being cast by all the people in the video. Well, now we know the exact camera location, we can actually use this as a sundial. So using a plugin for Blender, we could actually determine the exact time this video was filmed down to the minute. So once we had that, we checked the satellite imagery to see when the marks appeared on the ground. That allowed us to narrow down the date range when this video would have actually been filmed. And finally, this allowed us to establish the exact time and location and the approximate date of when it was filmed. So this area of justice and accountability has become something that we're working on a lot. We've just opened an office in The Hague, which was partly funded by the Dutch Postcode Lottery. We've been building a coalition of organizations over the past year focused on Yemen and the conflicts in Yemen. So we've been looking at the Global Legal Action Network and their work, and we recently had a hackathon in London with the New York Times and Human Rights Centre at UC Berkeley School of Law and Amnesty International, where we brought together a team of people from different backgrounds and started investigating 100 Saudi airstrikes. Those airstrikes are now being slowly added to our Yemen website. The part of the intention of that is to use it in justice and accountability efforts, and this is a video from the Global Legal Action Network about it. So as you can see, we've got a big coalition of organizations involved with this project, and a lot of what we do at Bellingcat is building these networks and getting them to work together in different ways. We're now adding all the investigations to our Yemen project website, which is yemen.bellingcat.com. Part of that is actually the methodology that we use for the investigations, and we're hoping to package this into a teachable process that we'll be able to share with other organizations who are interested in this area. And we're working with various bodies to make sure that what we're actually producing is something that's going to be useful for them in the future. So that's kind of looking at conflicts, but we use open source investigations in different ways as well, not just looking at conflict zones. Something we do a lot is crowdsourcing, where we use our kind of audience to figure stuff out. And this is one example where we did this, a geolocation challenge, where these images were being shared online by ISIS supporters. These were basically a hashtag campaign that ISIS social media teams were running, which is a real thing. And you're seeing 3 images here. Now, the first one on the left, you're not going to be able to geolocate that. If you can come and work for me. The second one is clearly inside a shop, but there's not really many clues there. You can see there's tins of Quality Streets on the back shelf, but it doesn't really tell you much. But this one is geolocatable. Oh, that's not the right button. This one. So this is geolocatable. Now, I saw these images being shared online, and I thought, this is something that would be good for crowdsourcing because they're in different cities in the world. You might not have experience of these locations, but someone who follows you on Twitter might. So I shared this, and within 10 minutes, someone had figured out the location. Now, this is in Munster in Germany, and we all know Germans are very organized people. And what you can see in the background there is an advertising pole. And in Germany, they have a website for advertising locations. It's like Google for advertising. So you can search this. You can search for advertising poles in Munster, and it gives you a result page. And you can start clicking through those and finding all the different locations of the advertising poles marked here. And then you start looking for one that's on a junction, like this one, and you can start geolocating it using the usual boxes and highlights that we use. So we can see the advertising poles up here. Just behind it is a metal railing that's visible. We can see the road markings are also visible, and traffic lights are visible, along with lots of other clues. And this was geolocated within 10 minutes of it being shared online. And there were several other photographs, one from London, one from Paris, and one from Schiphol Airport that was also geolocated of these ISIS supporters holding up this piece of paper. And because it was crowdsourced, it could be geolocated very, very quickly indeed. Another way we use crowdsourcing is supporting other organizations. So Europol's been running a campaign called Trace an Object, Stop Child Abuse. What they've been doing is taking objects from child abuse imagery and asking the public to identify them. We saw this campaign. Europol has very few Twitter followers, but we have lots, so we started sharing this and encouraging people to get involved. And very quickly, people started identifying these items. One of the most impressive examples was this photograph. This was a hotel room from one of the images. This could be any hotel room anywhere in the world. I think it took a day or two for someone to find it. They said they'd stayed in the same hotel, and we got a picture from the website that showed it was the same room visible on the website as well. It's been a successful campaign. From what I understand, Europol has now announced there's been 6 children rescued and 1 suspect identified as well, and I believe there's more. But as a thank you, after a year of this, they produced the following video that summarizes everything they found so far. Excuse me, the clicker's not behaving. Nope, that didn't work.
We are all part of a community, as are children facing abuse. Trace an object is how you can help them. Victim identification is a task for specialists, but we don't know everything. That's why we need your input to identify specific objects and locations so victims who have suffered abuse or exploitation can be made safe. The tips you send are really useful. We see the work you've done and how you've used your personal knowledge and skills. We receive a great many tips, too many to give individual feedback, but we appreciate every single one. Our victim identification specialists take your tips and work to verify and develop them further. Sometimes an object is too widely distributed to be of use. We feed this back to colleagues so they can concentrate on other leads instead. Sometimes the tips lead us in a definite direction. We review the information and feed it to the community of investigators. If the information can be used, it is sent for further investigation to the relevant country. This process involves investigation with oversight from supervisors, prosecutors and judges, so all the proper steps are taken to protect the child in the image. We know you're curious about our process. You've asked us why we leave images up when good leads are available. We post the objects on the website in batches and take down batches to ensure the child has the best chance of being identified. These investigations take time, but with your help, it's much faster. You are making it possible for a child who may have lost hope to know that someone cared enough to take the time to rescue them. That's your contribution. Thank you.
So this is continuing. One of the more recent examples are these images. This is a city, presumably in Asia. So these photographs could be anywhere in Asia. But within a couple of weeks, someone had actually found the location. And what was quite nice about this, he's someone from Finland. He got involved. He shared it with Europol. We wrote an article about it where we confirmed his geolocation and found even more details. And because of that, he got some coverage in the local Finnish press for what he did. And now he's been really encouraged to engage more with this kind of investigation. And what we're trying to do at Bellingcat as well is get people feeling like they're actually participating in the community and that they're being recognized for that work. And this is a great way for that to happen. Another way we can use this is in missing persons cases. So this photograph, this video rather, was shared online. It had been shared by a family who had gone to the British Virgin Islands to move into a new house. They hadn't told their family back in the UK their new address. When they got to the British Virgin Islands, there was a hurricane and they disappeared. And this was the last video that they had shared. And this is what we had to work on. So that's what we had to start with. They were in the British Virgin Islands somewhere, and we had this video. But there were clues in here. So we can see here, this coastline in the distance is the islands that are nearby. So again, using crowdsourcing, I asked people if they could figure this out. So we were all looking. And what you can do in Google Earth is actually look at three-dimensional terrain. So someone went into Google Earth and started going around the edge of the British Virgin Islands, looking outwards, until they could actually see similar-looking islands using the 3D terrain, which you can see here. Of course, we wanted a photograph that was kind of more reliable, so we could use this platform called EchoSec. And EchoSec is a platform that allows you to search for geotagged social media posts. And one of the posts in this area was from Flickr. And we could download a nice high-resolution version of this image and then get a good close look at it. And we could compare that to the islands that were visible in the video, and it seemed to be a match. So this narrowed down the locations that we were looking at. But then we needed other clues because there were all kinds of buildings in that area and we didn't know which one they were in. So we started looking at other details. So we can see the edge of the roof here. It's got this kind of wooden wedge shape going around the edge of it. And we can see the banister, which is also wooden with a few nails or perhaps screws in it. So those were our next two clues. So I started looking at the images of the coastline around this location. We could see in this location, this was an industrial area, so it wasn't going to be there. Over on this side, you would have seen the boats that were in the foreground. But this location was interesting because here we could see lots of residential homes. We could see homes with driveways and swimming pools and other details. So I was thinking, where can I get images of these houses? Because I don't have any street view imagery there. We don't have lots of geotagged photographs of the inside of people's houses. But what we do have is Airbnb and estate agents. And they were renting and selling these houses, and all that information was online. So I started going through all the houses looking for that wooden wedge shape on the roof and the banister on the other side. And what was interesting is all these houses appear to have unique designs. So they had different banisters, they had different styles of houses. They were all unique in different ways. And eventually, I found this house. Selling for $895,000. And I was looking through the pictures and I immediately saw this. A very similar style, even though the right-hand side is quite washed out, you can still see it's the same style. And also on the roof, a similar wedge shape. So it seemed likely this was the same building, but I was scratching my head because none of the views I had seemed to match. And this is the house in question. And as I said before, all the houses in the area seemed unique. But then I looked at the house next door. It was the same roof layout, the same chimney position, just with an extra swimming pool and different colored tiles. So I thought maybe this is where they are. So we got in contact with the estate agents who were selling the house on the left-hand side. He said he had actually just sold the house on the right-hand side to a British family who had gone missing a few days earlier because they had been rescued from the place. And we were able to actually get the missing family in contact with their family back in the UK, just from that single video. Another example, we sometimes get asked about fake news as well. Fake news is a fairly complex subject. It's a term that's used and abused quite frequently. But this is a really good example because it shows that how by discussing this, you can kind of inoculate people against it. So this is a tweet that was shared by the Russian Ministry of Defense. And it was showing irrefutable evidence that the US are actually covering ISIS combat capabilities, recovery, and using them to promote American interests in the Middle East. So this is a really big claim that the US is helping ISIS, so ISIS can be used by the US in the future. And this is their irrefutable evidence. And they tweeted it in Arabic, they tweeted it in Russian, they shared it on social media, Facebook, all over the place. They were trying to make this a really big story. But I was a bit confused because this is one of the images they used. ISIS automobile convoy used Abu Kamal for the Syrian-Iraqi border. And I was confused because I'd seen it 2 weeks earlier on a tweet from an Indian journalist saying, live drone action over Mosul, attached video is of an ISIS convoy trying to resupply fighters and being taken out by a Predator drone. So a completely different story. And there's a reason for that, because this is the video in question. What you might notice is the big red fire button in one corner. You also might notice it says development footage, this is a working process, all content subject to change, because it's from a computer game. And it looked like it could be one of these kind of AC-130 gunship type computer games that are popular nowadays. So I Googled that and found the original video on YouTube. So the Indian journalist had used this video footage to claim it was a Predator strike, and the Russian Ministry of Defense had used a screenshot from this video, claiming it to be irrefutable evidence that the US was helping ISIS. A computer game screenshot. So I made a snarky tweet, and the thing is, the people who saw that, who follow me on Twitter, are the same sort of people who follow the Russian Ministry of Defense on Twitter. So when they saw the Russian MOD share it, after we wrote a lengthy article about it as well, with lots of details, the Russian MOD shared it, and the immediate reaction within minutes of it being shared was along these lines. Sharing the original footage from the computer game, and this was interesting because they had been inoculated against this specific piece of fake news. So they immediately reacted to it. In a way, it was like the kind of body of the internet reacting as a defense mechanism against false information. So the Russian MOD was embarrassed. The Russian media started covering it and saying how it was ridiculous that it had been covered. So the Russian MOD had another go at it, sharing new imagery, claiming it was exactly the same thing. But by that point, people had stopped taking them so seriously. So irrefutable evidence of American tanks aiding ISIS in Syria. And because of this, because of the ridiculous nature of the story, you actually had media coverage that was very different from what they wanted. Rather than it being Russia proves irrefutable evidence as ISIS being helped by the US, it was Russia using computer game pictures. And this was covered in the mainstream press, but it was also covered in the text press as well. Most interestingly was the coverage from Russia Today, because normally Russia Today is obviously very pro-Russian, but here they wrote that the images were put online by a civilian employee in error. But even they couldn't resist using the humorous replies to the tweets of the Russian MOD about them using computer game footage. So what's next for Bellingcat? As I've been saying, we're opening an office in The Hague. That office is going to be the home of our new Yemen project. We've also been doing lots of training sessions. We've just been running one as part of the Utrecht in Residencies program. We really want to come and train as many people as possible in the Netherlands to do investigations, ideally looking into what's happening in their local area and helping them produce investigations that we hope will be published in the local media and even beyond. So we're working with De Bali in Amsterdam, Impact in Utrecht, and the Utrecht in Residencies program, and many of the other partners that's been mentioned here already. And that's our plans for the future, and that's Bellingcat. So thank you very much.